Hi everyone, my name is Laura Villalobos. I'm WiCyS Community Manager, and it's an honor to have you today in this WiCyS Strategic Partner webinar with Recorded Future. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce you a little bit more about the WiCyS organization. WiCyS is a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission to recruit, retain, and advance women in cyber. Our community is made up of over 8.7 thousand members who are women, men, and non-binary individuals in over 86 countries. We have 63 professional affiliates who are an extension of WiCyS all over the world, 225 student chapters, and that's just our community alone. What we do is create accessible opportunities to cybersecurity. We layer with mentorship and resource. We aligned it with all our strategic partners, and we create a place where everyone belongs in cybersecurity. And we do it through our many initiatives. We have our skill development training programs, our scholarships and grants and awards, our annual conference, which will be next year in April 2024, our job board plus where members can upload the resume and strategic partners can recruit all year round. We have our leadership series, our mentor mentee program, which currently has over 1.6 thousand members enrolled. So we have all of this and so much more. We all of our wonderful initiatives to all of our strategic partners. We have our tier 1 strategic partners who are Alchemine, Amazon, AT&T Cybersecurity, Battelle, Bloomberg, Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineer Institute, Cisco, Ford, Fortinet, Google, Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, Optum, Sandia National Laboratories, and SentinelOne. And for the purpose of this webinar, we have the experts here with you today. So please ask the questions because we will be answering them live. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our WiCyS newsletter. And you can find that at wicys.org. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the Recorded Future team on the topic of From Risk to Intelligence, Operationalizing Threat Intelligence in Your Organization. And Charity, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. We are proud partners of WiCyS, and Kathleen and I, who are presenting today, have both been a part of the women in security community, so we're really happy to be here. My name is Charity Wright. I'm a threat intelligence consultant with Recorded Future. My clients are here in North America, and most of them are big private sector companies. So currently I'm advising them on strategic priorities for threat intelligence, helping them mature their programs and really getting the most out of their intelligence. But previously I started out my career in U.S. Army and the National Security Agency. So I've done a variety of cyber threat intelligence, as well as signals intelligence. And recently when I worked in the research team, I researched disinformation and malign influence operations. So very happy to be here with you today. Please do connect with me. If you have your phone on you, you can scan that QR code. I promise I'm not phishing you. It'll take you directly to my LinkedIn page to connect. And Kathleen?
Similar disclaimer, I promise I am also not phishing you. I tested the link. It does bring you to myself. I think there's only one other Kathleen Kuczma anyway on LinkedIn, so probably a good chance you'll connect with me. But I'm so excited to be presenting with Charity again. I'm a senior sales engineer here at Recorded Future, and I've been in this role for the past 5 years, actually this month. So time has gone by very quickly. And I work kind of similar to Charity, but more before a company even decides to become a Recorded Future client. So I work with prospective companies on how threat intelligence can be valuable for their organization, how we can integrate directly into different tools. So a lot of my conversations are with maybe not yet Recorded Future and clients, but hopefully soon. And similar to Charity, I also was an intelligence analyst in the Department of Defense. I did counterterrorism missions, nation-state cyber threat actors. So I did everything from reporting to more the signals intelligence side. And yeah, I'm excited to see how all this obviously overlaps with cybersecurity and everything that we're going to go through today.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about operationalizing threat intelligence. More specifically, we're going to take you from the very high level, the strategic view of what is the priorities of your organization and how do you protect them against risk. But then we're going to whittle down to how do we take these and really turn it into intelligence products that serve your company the best. Threat intelligence should be preventing incidents and reducing the risk to your organization. So today we're going to talk about what are the greatest risks to your organization. And as we go through these slides, I encourage you to take notes, jot down some ideas about your company specifically, and about what you know about your company's overall goals. What are you trying to protect the most? And then what are the greatest risks? So the character of cyber threats has changed. Respondents now believe that cyber attackers are more likely to focus on business disruption and reputational damage. These are the top two concerns among respondents in the World Economic Forum Outlook 2023 report.
Which, knowing how important and top of mind and the overlap between business risks and cyber risk, maybe the statistic will be surprising to those on the call today about how many companies currently do not have any type of documented priority intelligence requirements or intelligence requirements, PIRs, however you would like to describe asking questions that you would want to be answered. And when I saw actually how high this number was, it maybe didn't shock me because I thought back to, well, how do you get intelligence requirements in the first place? You do have to be asking good questions and understanding the risk that your business faces. And on the good questions piece, I had a story or an experience where pretty early on into my intelligence career, I had a manager who gave me the task of creating this central repository for all the great data that my coworkers were putting together for their different targets and threats. I remember being excited. I thought, this is a project, it's great for me. I'm going to email everyone and get everyone on the same page. We're going to make this great resource. Well, I sent the email. Days went by, nothing. And I realized looking back that one, I was not very specific on what I was really looking for from a requirements perspective. What did I need from my team members to help me create this repository? And two, I didn't explain or connect it to why it mattered. So that was a lesson learned, and also important to understand, as these companies, if they don't have intelligence requirements, what are some of the things that company might be missing? And then if you are in that situation, how do you coax out some good requirements, which is also something we'll spend a good amount of time talking about today. This is where the planning piece is so important, as I mentioned. So really talking a lot today about the planning piece of what we call this intelligence lifecycle. No presentation would probably be complete when on intelligence without the lifecycle phase. I know Charity and I had this drilled into us very early on into our careers. I'm sure we were tested on it many times. So planning phase, extremely important, as we will focus a lot on that today.
So how does threat intelligence reduce risk? Let's take another look at this. There are many aspects of the way that threat intelligence helps your organization. And I think the slide is very important because a lot of people don't even understand what is threat intelligence and how does it work for our security program. So basically, an advantage is need to get ahead of risks and threats. And what we're providing is decision advantage. Threat intelligence gives your leaders the advantage of understanding context, seeing the analytics, seeing some probability and implication statements. And then ultimately, what I feel is most important in a threat intel program is actionability and prioritization. Because your leaders have so many priorities that they're just stacking up and they're wondering, how do I decide where to put our time, our energy, and our resources the most? So threat intelligence gives them the advantage to say, okay, this needs to be a priority, or this is an urgent matter that we need to address right away. So essentially, we're giving them the decision advantage. Threat intelligence also protects against internal failures and external threats. So, not only are you looking internally at your logs and what's going on and looking for anomalies, but you're also looking at what's going on around you. Who is targeting our industry? What threat actors are most likely to target our organization? We use threat intelligence to cover all of the attack surfaces. We use it to prioritize, to enhance automation, and to drive better return on investment. So essentially, security is a big data problem, and threat intelligence is that layer that connects it and reduces risk overall.
So let's actually put some words in what we've been talking about so far into action. Here, we're going to go through a few different steps, talking about building a profile for your organization, which is the first step you need before you can figure out what your top risks are and generate those requirements. So for step one, what is your unique organization's industry, the infrastructure used, geography, because the geopolitical aspect is always, has played a role for many years, but is only going to continue to play more and more of a role in influencing cyber operations, especially from like the hacktivist side. Who are your vendors and your third parties? Who are your actual clients themselves? Do your clients have data that would be enticing for a threat actor? So let's use MGM Resorts as an example. We'll go back to them a little bit later in the presentation, but from a data perspective, there's lots of clients' data from those who are staying at the hotel, personal information. So thinking about not only the data that matters to your company, but obviously the clients or the customers that you have, and what data do you need to protect, also based on compliance, because that's also where the fines come in, which no company likes to pay a fine. So we do have a few sample organizations here. Organization one is what we're going to use somewhat as the basis for some of the rest of what we'll talk about today, where we are a financial institution, lots of money for revenue, billion B, pretty big company, lots of vendors, going to have a ton of different third-party access ways of other attack surface that's not just our own company, but obviously any of those vendors that we're using. And then also having a very big digital infrastructure where we're going to care about a lot of different threats related to the profile of our specific company.
And I want to mention, we like to do these choose your own adventure style presentations, but if you have a clear idea of the profile of your company, feel free to jot that down and work through this presentation based on the company that you work for currently. If you don't have an employer right now, let's say you're a student or you're unemployed, that's fine too. You can follow along with our example. So we're going to walk you through how to identify the top 3 risks to your organization. Basically, there are many different risks, high-level strategic type risks that can be posed to your company. And like we said, like Kathleen showed you, it really depends on the profile of your company. For starters, is it a public sector company or is it a private sector company? Is it a nonprofit? So your company profile could determine what the top 3 risks are. Some examples could include financial fraud, compliance failure, competitive disadvantage, brand impairment, or operational downtime. Now, we already mentioned earlier from a survey that operational downtime and brand impairment are very high on the list of concerns for many leaders. So let's take a look at the top 3 risks to organization one. They are a financial organization with $30 billion of annual revenue, very large company, over 30,000 employees and 10 million customers located in many different countries all over the world. So they also service U.S. military, DoD, vets, and families. I think I could guess who this company is. Also, they have hundreds of vendors and third-party IT providers. That means they have a very large attack surface where threat actors could leverage those third parties to get to them. And they have extensive digital infrastructure. So what we're looking at here, I believe what the top 3 risks are to this financial organization or bank could be brand impairment. Of course, their reputation is very important, and they service many DoD and military. So brand is very important to them. Compliance failure would be a big problem because they are a financial organization. And of course, financial fraud, which could, cut into their revenue and really, cause harm to the business overall.
So for step 3, putting threat intelligence into action. So understanding that for that financial company, really all 5, as Jerry and I were discussing before, all 5 of those risks can apply to most companies, but really trying to prioritize and also asking the executives that you're working with to also prioritize does help, so that not every fire is something you need to put out immediately, right? There's going to be things you need to prioritize. If everything matters the same amount, that's going to be not great and probably a recipe for burnout. So what are different alerts and different intelligence that this is specific to Record Features portfolio that we could tie to those 3 different risks that our financial institution really cares the most about? One that does stand out to me is just threat intelligence in general, really focusing on the threat actor piece, ransomware groups, understanding the indicators of compromise that are associated with those threat actors. So not only do you understand, hey, this threat actor targeted this company, but what were the specific tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, associated with that specific threat actor. So then you can actually have some mitigation strategies. And as you know from the theme, we will talk more about the MGM hack as an example as we go through some more threat intelligence modeling exercises. But brand intelligence is also going to provide information, and you may hear this as digital risk protection, very similar information where what's important to your company is understanding what is currently available on dark web marketplaces. Is there source code that shouldn't be out there that could be leading to maybe some servers being accessed that shouldn't be? Criminal marketplaces, are there credentials being stolen and being posted on these different forums that are available for threat actors? And same from a vulnerability perspective. And all these different types of intelligence definitely can map to each of those. But for vulnerabilities, understanding what are those key threats to your technologies. The Move It vulnerability, people are still responding to Move It. And I will say, my mom, this is the one vulnerability my mom has ever brought up. And she is a computer scientist, but very focused on the internal coding piece. So when she was like, wow, yeah, Move It really made an impact, I thought, that is not usually a conversation I have with my mom. So I'm sure everyone is still wrapping their heads around, specific technology vulnerabilities like that. And really the whole picture of putting together what we've been talking about from an objectives and key questions perspective, that's where it does tie back to that SAN CTI statistic on about 65% of organizations don't have those intelligence requirements. So how are you going to map the specific risks that your business has to the different areas that your cybersecurity organization and function is going to answer? So it's important to have those as the objectives and key questions. And then understanding and taking a look at what are the internal sources that I have that are important to me? What about external sources that I need to put into context some of what I'm seeing on the internal side? And then what are your internal stakeholders? Are you a SOC analyst who needs to provide and escalate incidents to someone who's threat hunting, maybe level 1 or level 2? Are you a vulnerability management analyst who has to keep up to date on these are the top priority CVEs we need to patch and actually mitigating those? So putting it all together is very important.
Mm-hmm. I like this graph. It can be a little complicated when you first look at it, but it makes a lot of sense because you really do have to tailor your threat intel program to the people and the resources that you have available. I work with some of the largest companies in America, and you'd be surprised at how all of their threat intel teams differ. Some have a small group of security engineers that are really good at handling the tools that they have. So they put a lot of money into the products and the vendors to get that intelligence brought into their SIM and SOAR, but they don't have a lot of experts in threat intel. And then others have huge programs with, up to 20 personnel analyzing, researching, and engineering those tools. So I think it's important to tailor your program to what you have. And I'm sure many of you can relate, but what is ideal for your threat intel program is not always what your employer will be able to provide. Sometimes there's limitations on budget, tools, or hiring. And so you just have to do your best with what you have. And I think that is why this picture is very important, because it's important for you to prioritize what requirements you're going to need. And like if you can start with maybe your top 3 to 5 priorities, based on feedback from your leadership and build on that risk profile of your company, then you'll be successful in your program providing that intel. So why are we building priority intelligence requirements? And I know that's a mouthful. If you've never been in the military or in the intelligence community, PIRs are basically intelligence priorities. So we like to define this as, let's say, we ask your CISO, what keeps you up at night? What are your biggest concerns for security? What are you most afraid of happening or impacting your organization? We got to start with those priorities up top. So we build PIRs to prioritize your time, budget, and efforts towards those risks and threats that are most likely to impact your organization. So that doesn't mean looking out at the world and going, oh, this nation state threat actor has been conducting all this activity and targeting, let's say, government and education. Well, if you work for a completely different type of organization, that may not be your priority, that particular threat actor. But if you work in, let's say, the gaming or entertainment industry, then ransomware might be one of your top priorities, because you can look out at the threat landscape and see that your industry is being heavily hit by a particular ransomware group. So it has to be tailored to your organization. The second part is that identifying your PIRs will help you deliver value very quickly. So if you have a CISO or a manager who is expecting a return on their investment is both you, the team member, and the vendors, the threat intel and security products that you're spending money on, then we have to work together to deliver that value, to deliver the prioritization and the context that they need to make those important decisions. So increased return on investment from your vendors, tools, and your CTI program. That's another reason to build a PIR. And then a third reason is to quickly identify any gaps that you have in collection. So if you need to know everything there is about a certain ransomware group, or who are they posting on their extortion site, or you want visibility into who's talking about your brand in dark web forums and what are they saying about your company, and you don't have access to that type of intelligence, that would be a major gap in your collection. So it's really important to identify what your priorities are, and then look at what type of intelligence do we need to fulfill these priorities or to answer our biggest questions. And then you look at what sources you have. Like, first, bottom line, if you have limited resources, you want to start with free open source options. And then you build on that. If you get a budget for tools, then you can add it in. And when you talk to the vendors about what you need, they should be asking you, what are your intelligence requirements or priorities? And if you already have them outlined, then that just helps you guys build on that investment and deliver that value quickly. And then they'll help you fill those collection gaps. So find solutions to close the gaps and increase visibility into relevant threats.
One other thing I'll mention with intelligence requirements is, depending on where you're starting, if your company already has some that have been established for a while, but maybe they need to be revamped or tuned, or whether you're starting from scratch, is at least just for preparing to either engage in testing with a specific company with Recorded Future. Sometimes I'll use a tool like ChatGPT. Granted, I don't pay for the 4 version or whatever they're on now. And I'll see, if I'm putting in not anything sensitive, don't worry, I'm not putting anything sensitive into these different tools, but if I'm outlining a prompt to ChatGPT and saying, I'm a manufacturing company, these are some of my key attributes, these are some of the things I care about, write a cyber reduction plan or create some requirements. That's another way. Obviously, it's important to query internally, but if you're looking for kind of anything out there to see what are maybe some gaps or things we haven't considered, again, you can think of some open source tools to help with that.
Okay, so next we're going to show you threat modeling. So you know that you need to build intelligence requirements, but you're not really sure where to start. Threat modeling is a process for identifying and categorizing potential threats and then prioritizing the mitigations against the threats that pose the greatest risk to your organization. This is a diagram of the threat modeling process. As you can see here, you can first define your priorities and your risk, diagram them, identify, mitigate, and validate. This is an ongoing process, much like the intelligence process. There should always be a clear definition of what you're looking for, what you're doing, and then it should end in some feedback. So once you provide a process, there should be feedback on, is this working for us or not? Step one, what is the risk profile of your organization? So this is where we were starting earlier, talking about the risk profile of your company. You want to first identify this when you're going into threat modeling. And these are some of the questions that you can ask to get started in building that risk profile. Not only what type of company it is, where your customers are, and all of the infrastructure that you use, but you want to ask specifically, what are our crown jewels? What is the most valuable data that we have? Or conversely, you could ask, what would cost us the most if this information was breached? It might be PCI, credit card data. It might be PHI if you work for a health organization, PII in everybody's HR systems. It could be proprietary information, intellectual property. Let's say you're developing a new technology. That's a very common target for nation state threat actors. Then you want to look at, well, like I said, what data loss would cost us the most. So not just money, but operational downtime. Let's say if your website went offline or none of your employees had access to the company servers, to access, the platforms they use the most. How would that cost your company money? And also, how many customers would you probably lose from that incident, or just the reputational damage? For example, there are some companies that it's like you feel like you see them in the news pretty often for being breached, even if they deny that they were breached. That kind of reputational damage can cost you quite a lot. Then you're going to look at what assets or systems do we control or operate. If you work for an oil and gas company or a transportation organization or a water organization that's critical infrastructure, you're definitely going to be looking at what type of systems do we operate and which of these are the most critical, like which would be the most detrimental if they were shut down by a threat actor. And then you also want to ask, like, which threat actors would have an interest in targeting these particular systems or our data? So if you know that one of the ransomware groups that is very active targets specific vulnerabilities in certain platforms and software, you want to evaluate, do we use that type of platform or software? And if so, are we currently updated? Are we doing pen testing on that particular type of software? And are we doing everything we can to prioritize, protecting that particular version of that software from being exploited. And then, of course, you want to ask what type of infrastructure is vulnerable to those top threat actors.
So there's two different approaches that Charity and I are each going to walk through on how you can do your threat modeling exercise. First one we're going to start off with is a target-centric model. And as we said before, going to be focused on the MGM hack. But this model, as mentioned, focuses on which organizations have been targeted recently. And then based off of understanding their risk profile, what are some of the intellectual property that might be a target, especially more for a nation state, right? It's typically a little bit more of a sophisticated aim for a company or for a threat actor. What is that PII, PCI, PHI, all the PII, different types of data that you as an organization have that would be enticing from a financially motivated threat actor, maybe just a hacktivist who's just looking to kind of name and shame and say, hey, we don't like oil and gas and we're just going to do all these things and reveal all this data. That's also another aspect. And then what are the actual systems you have? What are the internal systems that should be behind a firewall, should only be accessible by those within your company in a VPN, versus what are those that are public facing? And as they should be public facing, depending on what their functions are. So we're going to use this to briefly walk through with MGM Resorts as being the target in, I'm sure as everyone has heard the last few weeks, the most recent ScatterSpider / Black Alpha affiliate type of cyber attack. But from a practitioner perspective, I'm sure there are a lot of cybersecurity analysts who, the day that this was first revealed, then thought, well, I have to start answering questions to my executives on, could we have fallen to a similar type of attack? And there's a lot of different moving parts to an attack like this, as new information is revealed, as threat actors claim to have targeted the company, as they supposedly share how they actually access the company. So a lot of other types of information does come out over time. So as of now, at least as of me just checking somewhat recently, some of the different, patented technologies that maybe a threat actor would be interested in would be any of the gambling technology. So if you're trying to replicate, using a certain software tool for other companies, right, that might be something you kind of care about that has been patented and you would want to protect. What about customer data? So what customer data do MGM Resorts have? They're a casino, they have hotel guests. So we're going to have a lot of personally identifiable information, credit card data related to those who are obviously using their hotel, using their casino. Also going to have their own employee data that they're protecting. There has been chatter about Okta credentials that have been stolen. I've also seen both Azure. Wouldn't be shocking that a company would use both Okta and Azure, so probably could be credentials for both of them. And then from a systems perspective, there was the IT help desk angle. This gets into more of that social engineering piece, which we'll talk about in the diamond model on the next slide. And then just from an internal systems perspective, were there technologies that MGM was using that was not patched or was susceptible and had been exploited by a threat actor? And one of the other potential vector points was the specific ESXi server that had not been patched and had been known to have been used and targeted by a few different ransomware groups. So what we know, as I said today, because everything is always changing, is understood who the target is in this case, which is why we're doing a target-centric threat modeling. Adversary, ScatterSpider, who is supposed to be an affiliate of Black Cat Alpha ransomware. But what are some of the capabilities that ScatterSpider has used that we, as practitioners, can use to test our own defenses? One, credential theft. So this is a good time to take stock of how do we learn about these credentials? How quickly do we learn? What are the sources we have? And from an automation play, how are we actually pushing that data into tools that you can action right away? Because, right, we're analysts, we try to work 9 to 5 or however long your day kind of extends. Obviously burnout in the cybersecurity realm is real. So being able to push that data into tools to action right away and still have that analyst piece is really important. Understood there was multi-factor abuse going on, unauthorized accounts or I should say unauthorized access to privileged account, the social engineering aspect, and then the infrastructure would have been actually compromising those Okta accounts, the phishing infrastructure. So one key area of this specific attack was targeting an IT help desk, social engineering, calling, and claiming to need your multi-factor token, which no one ever calls to ask you for that. But that is still a part of that specific threat actor's infrastructure for obviously planning and targeting, looking for LinkedIn contacts for the IT help desk. So many different reconnaissance pieces too that were going on here that you can think of. Well, if I was a threat actor targeting my company, what are the reconnaissance that I would see as I was doing my research? So what types of intelligence may have helped in this scenario? Identity intelligence, which is going to be getting data directly from information stealer malware logs, such as a redline stealer, VIDAR, raccoon stealer. Anything with stealer is probably an information stealer malware. Understanding your attack surface, so understanding if you had the ESXi servers that were vulnerable, and most importantly, tying that into active exploitation. Lots of software vulnerabilities get published every day. Not all of them have the same weight or have the same ramifications if they are acted upon as others. So understanding what your top vulnerabilities are and prioritizing those, and then testing those out, whether it's like an IR tabletop, that all becomes extremely important as executives ask and say, well, how are we preventing or trying to help us not fall susceptible to a similar attack? Understanding the types of intelligence you have is going to help provide that reassurance that not complete guarantee, but that something will be able to be caught. And this all ties into mitigation strategies. So understanding, based on those capabilities we know about, based on the TTPs, some ideas that I would have if I was an internal security team would be, testing our own IT help desk's knowledge of recognizing if it's a smishing or a phishing, right? SMS phishing. I'm sure we've all gotten those texts from your CEO, right? Claiming you need to wire money right away, right? Smishing, phishing, and with AI and the voice piece only going to get even better as threat actors write better scripts and have those who are actually performing, so to speak, these different scripts only going to keep getting better. So being able to monitor for credential leaks, and then again, understanding those top technologies that are being exploited, all is extremely important to help, especially with that target-centric piece, as we're using the MGM Resorts hack as an example, and then doing like a like for like to see where we stand up.
I really like on the last slide, Kathleen, I like at the bottom where you have outlined the ransomware MITRE tactics that were used. This is really great. If you can identify what MITRE TTPs were used, which is basically a coding system for different tactics, techniques, and procedures. If you can identify those MITRE T codes that were used in a campaign through your incident response program, or even in a threat intel capacity, if you know that a certain threat actor uses these particular tactics, then you can prepare your organization to defend against it. But it's also great for, identifying those in your logs. So using them, ingesting this into your SIM or SOAR platform will help you identify those types of techniques being happening currently in your systems. So I love that. I just wanted to mention that before we move forward.
Oh, no, absolutely.
And I love me a good diamond model, by the way. So the second threat model that you can use is threat actor centric. So instead of starting with your organization at the top, you're going to start with various threat actors and explore which threat actors are likely to target our organization. This will help you prioritize how you're defending against those particular tactics they're using. So if you want, you can do this as a workshop with your security team, with your SOC, or with your threat intel team. If you don't have that and you just have, let's say, kind of generalized security program, that's okay too. This will be a really great intel exercise for you all. You start out with general threat actors at the top, and we break them out into 3 different groups: state-sponsored, advanced persistent threat groups, cyber criminals, which are like your ransomware threat actors and your financially motivated ones, and then hacktivists, which are more politically or ideologically motivated threat actors. Then, once you have those broken out, you can start to identify which ones are most likely to target your organization. Now, at Recorded Future, in our platform, we offer what we call a threat actor threat map, which identifies which threat actors are most likely to target your organization based on what kind of technologies you use in your organization. So they're most likely to target those types of technologies. And I think that's really important to start with that top group. For example, here on this chart, this is a screenshot of our threat actor threat map. And I believe this is related to, I pulled this from the Critical Infrastructure organization. It's an energy company. So as you can see here on the left axis, you can see estimated intent. So how likely is it that this threat actor has intent to target my company or my industry? And then on the bottom is estimated opportunity. So as you move to the right of the graph, you'll see, okay, these are the groups that have the most opportunity to target us based on our technology stack in our industry and the risk profile of our company, which we already built. Now, if you don't have access to Recorded Future, you can build out a similar chart or just a list based on the risk profile you built earlier in the presentation and identifying those top risks to your company. So let me go back to the previous slide just real quick. So as you're breaking this down, I suggest that instead of looking at all nation state threat actors or all cyber criminals, start with those that are most likely to target your company. Let's say if the Klopp ransomware group is one of them, plug that into the cyber criminals part, and then start breaking down what are their tools and resources? What are their motivations? Are they financially motivated? If they're a ransomware group, they're definitely financially motivated. And what kind of opportunities do they have to target us using the tools and resources? Let's say if they use exploit kits, or they have ransomware affiliate groups that use that particular ransomware, you can really explore their full capabilities. What kind of a budget do they have? What are their biggest targets that they've hit before? How do they operate? And you can evaluate their capabilities, their intent, and their motivations, and their opportunity using this type of threat model. So let's go back to the next slide. Yeah. So this threat actor threat map is based on intent and opportunity. And for us, it's built off of custom watch lists of industry peers and threat trends. So this particular client, they are in the energy industry, which is also considered critical infrastructure for many. And you can see here that based on their custom watch list, which includes all types of technologies they use. It could be anything from their cloud infrastructure provider to their email provider to specific platforms. This graph is built off of which threat actors are most likely to target those technologies. Then you'll also see this is a heat map. So you can see the key at the bottom. The red indicates a higher threat, yellow or gray indicates limited severity or basic severity threat. So it's really great to use graphics like this, diagrams and charts, which make the threat prioritization a little bit easier to understand, especially for your executives. Let's say if you're presenting to a CISO or the board or a CEO, you want to make sure that the information you're translating to them comes through in an easy to understand way. Not saying that they're not intelligent, but sometimes a lot of words on a screen is not as impactful as a graph or a chart or a threat model.
We can all be challenged, I'm sure, to use less words on slides.
Oh, no, you know what I do love though? I love our AI insights paragraphs.
Yes.
I don't think we've addressed it, but Recorded Future uses our own model of GPT. It's not Chat GPT that's publicly available, but we use our own language model for AI to create these awesome summaries, like you see on the screen here. It's a summary of whatever you just searched for. So in this instance, it's a threat actor intel card that gives you all the information and context you need on a particular threat actor. And the AI insights paragraph is a summary of findings about that threat actor. So it makes it really easy to understand.
I'm a big fan of AI insights.
Me too. Okay, let's go back one. This is a follow-up to the threat actor the chart that we had just shown. I identified Red Foxtrot as a particular nation state threat group that poses a higher risk to that company. So if we want to look in and find out why, we can go in. These are screenshots from Recorded Future that show exactly how they're likely to target the energy industry, and it shows the names that they go by. It shows that they're a nation state. They're China nation state threat actor that has targeted multiple victims in the energy industry. And then we can go forward one slide. So this is how we would break this out. So with your threat actor at the top, we identified we're going to look at Red Foxtrot. And so I took the information from the left side chart and put it into a diamond model, which is my favorite. So in the diamond model, you can see the labels here. The threat actor at the top is Red Foxtrot. The victims and targets are at the bottom. And that could be that they target certain vulnerabilities, they target certain countries and certain organizations. So in the past, they have targeted power grids in India and Pakistan and other Central Asian countries. On the right side of the diamond, it looks a little messy, but these are screenshots. Some of the infrastructure that they use could include IP addresses, hashes, and domains. And then on the left side is some of their capabilities. Of course, I couldn't fit it all on the screen, but some of their capabilities include plugx, backdoors, shadowpad malware, cyber espionage, rootkits, and backdoors. And we have an extensive list of MITRE attack T codes that indicate exactly how they conduct their attacks. So this is an example of how you can take a broad threat model chart, starting with threat actors, and really break it down into fine detail, which will then prepare your intelligence team for what to collect on. These are the items that we need to know about. We need to know how Red Foxtrot conducts these attacks against the energy industry so we can protect against them. And there's also malware threat maps. For example, if you wanted to look at what type of ransomware is targeting the energy industry, you want to focus on those priorities first. And you can do that by looking at which threat actors target the tech stack that we use in our company. Awesome. Well, that is an overview of not only how to identify your priorities and your risk profile of your company, but all the way breaking it down from the risk to the priorities to the fine details of what we need to collect for intelligence for our leaders to make important decisions. So we thank you for your time today. Our contact info is here, and I think we do have a few questions. Let's start with the top. Christopher asked, so how do you keep the CIA balanced? I'm assuming you're referring to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. and not the CIA, the agency. um, my initial response to this is I feel like confidentiality out of that triad, confidentiality is probably the most important for your security team to focus on. Whereas availability and integrity might fall under the purview of other teams. Availability, everybody in the IT department can try to ensure availability of information and making sure your operations are up and running. So, threat intel does have a role in that as well. But I think the integrity of your information, that may fall under a different department. I don't know, Kathleen, do you have an opinion on that?
It's interesting. Yeah. When I first read CIA, I thought, interesting. I could not remember the other acronym. So Charity, I'm glad you said that aloud. I was like, oh yeah, that is a different acronym for CIA. I mean, this is definitely where, again, every company will be a little different. So that's a good way to frame, though, maybe as you're thinking of different business risks that are the most pertinent to your company, like being able to tag that to the CIA like acronym, so to speak, and figuring out, which of all the three maybe matters the most for your company. So it's definitely going to depend. I think just asking the question, understanding that's the goal of the question is understand that better. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah. I think the CIA triad is one model to determine the priorities of your security program. But personally, I prefer to go about it through PIRs instead. I prefer to address first the high level risk profile of your company because it's very specific to like identifying what are your top risks. And if operational downtime isn't one of your priorities, then maybe the CIA triad isn't as relevant, I feel. But whichever is your favorite, as long as you get to answer the right questions for your leadership.
I
What makes
agree.
Diamond Model my favorite? Well, um, the Diamond Model for intrusion operations came from the Department of Defense, and there were DoD analysts that created it, and it was created for analysts by analysts. And I feel it's a very appropriate way of addressing the whole, all the aspects of an operation or a hack. So personally, I kind of cut my teeth on cyber threat intelligence looking at the Diamond model. So it's very familiar to me. But a couple of years ago, when I started analyzing disinformation and malign influence operations from foreign countries, I was referring often to a diamond model that I have up here on my bulletin board. And I would think about these disinformation campaigns from the perspective of who is who's the influencer, who's the one spreading the information, who is their audience. And then I started looking at the capabilities and the infrastructure that they use in that disinformation campaign. So I started applying the diamond model to influence operations and ended up working with our research team to create a diamond model for influence operations. So I'm a little biased towards the diamond model, but I think it's a very holistic way of looking at an operation.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to why I like the diamond model is because even if you don't actually know who the threat actor is, you don't always have the chance to give attribution to a threat actor. One, if there's not enough information, the importance of understanding the infrastructure and TTPs, though, and if you're seeing overlaps from other incidents, it's just so many easy ways to be able to overlap and say, hey, we're seeing this in other areas of the company. We've seen similar campaigns before. And even if you don't know who's actually executing them, understanding, well, how do we prevent similar things from being executed? That's where I think the diamond model is really is key.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions?
Only other question maybe we could briefly touch on is just a question on about like kind of weighting the heat map from the threat actor map perspective. Might be a good ending question.
Yeah. Let's see. I guess what I can explain about our heat maps is it is based on risk level. So threat actors and malware are assigned certain risks based on multiple factors. I can't recall all the details of every factor, but we have those risk scores. And then the heat map is based on how high up or to the right that particular threat actor or malware is on that graph, which again is completely tailored to that particular company's tech stack and industry watch list.
The only thing I'll add, because that was a good explanation, is it is going to be a combination of the initial machine learning of recognizing, hey, we've seen this specific vulnerability used in this cyber attack, but then obviously the analyst piece is extremely important to say, yes, so we recognize that from an analyst perspective, provide that context to say, yes, this threat actor typically targets this industry. We've seen that data. So there's always that analyst piece too.
Yes. And on our particular threat actor chart, when you click on the name of that entity, whether it's a threat actor or malware, it opens up details about where that risk score came from. And I have to do a shameless plug. If anybody wants more information on how we do this, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help guide you to the right sources. And if you're interested in reading the Diamond Model for Influence Operations white paper, it's at recordedfuture.com.
Always good for a shameless plug.
Thank you, Kathleen and Charity. There's a question if there's going to be a recording, so I do want to answer that. You will get a recording to your email address right after this done, and this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well. So there will be a recording. But I want to thank Charity and Kathleen for the webinar and having us today. I appreciate it, and I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
all.
You'll have a good day.